The wind carried the scent of sage and dust as Nathan Naylor knelt at his father's grave, his weathered hat clutched between calloused fingers. The year was 1873, and the unforgiving sun of Colorado Territory beat down upon his shoulders as if trying to break him just as it had broken so many men before. The small cemetery on the outskirts of Victor was quiet save for the occasional whisper of the breeze through the sparse grass. Nathan hadn't cried not when his father had drawn his final breath 3 days prior, not during the funeral yesterday, and not now as he stared at the freshly turned earth that covered the only family he had left in this world. He was 26 years old and completely alone. The sound of footsteps approaching from behind caused his shoulders to tense, but he didn't turn. He wasn't ready for the pitying looks from the townsfolk or the awkward offers of condolences that meant nothing to ease the hollow feeling in his chest. The footsteps stopped nearby. Out of his peripheral vision, he saw the hem of a woman's skirt, the fabric a modest blue cotton that had seen better days. Still, he kept his gaze fixed on the wooden cross bearing his father's name, Samuel James Naylor, 1827–1873. A small, delicate hand appeared in his line of vision, holding a white handkerchief. He hadn't even realized tears had finally broken free until that moment. The woman said nothing, merely offered the simple cloth without expectation or demand. Nathan took it, finally looking up to see who had intruded upon his grief. His breath caught in his throat as he met the kindest pair of hazel eyes he'd ever seen, set in a face framed by auburn hair that glinted copper in the sunlight. "Thank you, miss." His voice was rough from disuse. "Lillian Bentley," she replied softly. "I'm sorry about your father, Mr. Naylor." Nathan nodded, dabbing at his eyes with her handkerchief. He recognized her now, the schoolteacher who had arrived in Victor just a month ago. He'd seen her in town, but they'd never spoken. "Nathan," he corrected. "Just Nathan," Lillian nodded, her hands clasped in front of her. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was visiting my mother's grave." She gestured to a stone marker several plots away. "I saw you here and thought, well, sometimes it helps to know you're not alone, even in grief." For the first time in days, Nathan felt something other than numbness. There was a quiet dignity about Lillian Bentley, an understanding in her eyes that went beyond simple pity. "Did she pass recently?" he asked, surprised at his own curiosity when all he'd wanted for days was silence. 3 years ago. She followed my father here when I was just a girl. He was a silver miner. When the consumption took them both, I decided to stay and teach." Nathan stood, brushing the dirt from his knees. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and towered over Lillian's slender form. "Your handkerchief," he said, holding it out to her. "I've soiled it." "Keep it," she replied. "I have others." The warm breeze lifted a strand of her hair, and she tucked it behind her ear with a practiced motion. "Will you be staying in Victor, Mr. Naylor?" Nathan. The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Nathan had been considering riding out, leaving behind the small ranch he'd worked with his father. Without Samuel, the burden of maintaining it seemed insurmountable. "I don't know," he admitted, the first time he'd spoken the words aloud. "Pa left debts. The ranch isn't what it used to be." Lillian nodded thoughtfully. "Whatever you decide, I hope you'll find peace." She offered a gentle smile. "Good day, Nathan." As she turned to leave, Nathan found himself watching her retreat, the handkerchief still clutched in his hand. For the briefest moment, the crushing weight of his grief seemed to lighten. "Miss Bentley," he called after her. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Thank you, truly?" Her smile widened slightly, and she nodded once before continuing on her way. Nathan looked back down at his father's grave, then at the handkerchief in his hand. A small, embroidered LB, adorned one corner in delicate blue thread. He carefully folded it and placed it in his pocket before settling his hat back on his head. He had decisions to make, but for now, he would honor his father by seeing to the ranch for at least one more day. The Double N Ranch had seen better days. Nathan stood on the porch of the modest cabin, surveying the property in the early morning light. 20 acres of decent grazing land, a A small herd of cattle, perhaps 30 head, and a few horses were all that remained of what had once been a thriving operation. His father had been forced to sell off parcels of land and livestock over the years, as the mining operations in the area had driven up taxes and reduced available water. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. Nathan had always maintained a sense of order, even when his father had become too ill to help. The mortgage papers and other documents lay spread across the kitchen table, where he'd been reviewing them late into the night. The bank would be looking for payment soon, and Nathan wasn't sure he could meet their demands. After a simple breakfast, he saddled his chestnut gelding, Rusty, and rode into town. Victor had grown considerably over the past few years as the mining operations expanded. What had once been a quiet settlement was now bustling with prospectors, miners, merchants, and the inevitable saloons and brothels that followed such enterprises. Nathan's first stop was the bank. Mr. Holloway, the bank manager, was a stern man who had done business with Samuel Naylor for years. He received Nathan in his office, offering perfunctory condolences before getting straight to the matter at hand. "Your father borrowed against the property last winter," Holloway explained, adjusting his spectacles as he reviewed the paperwork. "I'm afraid the payment is due at the end of the month." Nathan nodded. He'd known as much from his father's records. "How much time can you give me to settle the account?" Holloway sighed. "Ordinarily, I might be able to extend some courtesy, but the bank has investors in Denver who are pressing for returns. I can give you until the end of next month, but not a day more." It wasn't much, but it was something. Nathan thanked him and left, his mind already calculating what he would need to do to raise the necessary funds. As he stepped out onto the boardwalk, he nearly collided with Lillian Bentley, who was carrying a stack of books. "Oh," she exclaimed as the top book slid from her pile. Nathan caught it before it hit the ground. "Miss Bentley," he greeted, handing the book back to her. "Quite a load you're carrying," she smiled, adjusting her burden. "New readers for the schoolchildren. The town council finally approved my request for updated materials." There was genuine enthusiasm in her voice, and Nathan found it refreshing after his grim meeting at the bank. "May I help you with those?" he offered. "That's very kind, but the schoolhouse is just down the street," she replied. "Besides, I wouldn't want to keep you from your business." "My business is concluded for the moment," he said, reaching for half the stack before she could protest further. "And it would be my pleasure." They walked side by side down the main street, drawing curious glances from townspeople who weren't accustomed to seeing the reserved Cowboy in the company of the schoolteacher. "How are you faring?" Lillian asked after a moment of comfortable silence. Nathan appreciated that she didn't dance around the subject of his loss. "One day at a time," he answered honestly. "The ranch keeps me busy, which helps." "So you've decided to stay then?" Her question made him pause. Had he decided? The bank would take the ranch if he couldn't pay, but something in him rebelled at the thought of leaving his father's legacy without a fight. "For now," he said, "though it won't be easy." They reached the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. Inside, the single room was neat and orderly, with rows of desks facing a larger teacher's desk and blackboard. "You can put those on the desk," Lillian directed, setting down her own stack. "Thank you for the assistance." Nathan placed the books down carefully. "You've made this place inviting," he observed, noting the colorful maps on the walls and the small vase of wildflowers on the windowsill. "Many of these children come from difficult circumstances," she explained. "The miners' families especially. I try to make the schoolhouse a refuge of sorts." Her dedication was evident in every corner of the room. "How many students do you have?" he asked. 27 currently, ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. She ran her fingers along the spines of the new books. "Teaching all ages at once is challenging but rewarding." Nathan found himself admiring her commitment. "You must be very patient." Lillian laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Not always, but I try. What about you, Nathan? What does the Double N Ranch raise besides cattle?" He was surprised she knew the name of his ranch. Some horses. My father was known for breeding good stock before he fell ill. Yes, I've heard as much from the townspeople. They speak highly of Samuel Naylor's horses. A flicker of pride warmed Nathan's chest. Pa had a way with them. I've tried to maintain his standards. Lillian moved to straighten a row of slate boards. Perhaps you could continue that tradition. Perhaps, he echoed, though the financial realities weighed heavily on him. The school bell on the roof suddenly rang and Lillian glanced up with surprise. Oh, I didn't realize the time. The children will be arriving soon. Taking his cue to leave, Nathan retrieved his hat from where he'd set it on a desk. I should be going. Thank you for letting me help, Miss Bentley. Lillian, please, she corrected with a smile, and thank you again for the assistance. As he stepped outside, Nathan encountered a group of children making their way toward the schoolhouse. They regarded him with curious eyes, some nodding politely as they passed. He mounted Rusty and headed back toward the ranch, his mind filled with thoughts of both his uncertain future and the kind-eyed schoolteacher who seemed genuinely interested in his welfare. The next week passed in a blur of hard work. Nathan rose before dawn each day to tend to the cattle and horses, mend fences, and assess what might fetch a fair price if sold. He calculated that he could part with 10 head of cattle, and perhaps 2 of the younger horses without significantly damaging his ability to rebuild the herd later if there was to be a later. On Friday afternoon, he rode into town to speak with Josiah Perkins, the local livestock trader. Perkins was fair if not generous and offered a reasonable sum for the cattle. And the horses? Nathan asked, leaning against the corral fence where Perkins kept animals awaiting transport. The older man scratched his beard thoughtfully. Depends on which ones you're offering. Your pa always bred fine stock. The bay yearling and the dapple 2-year-old, Perkins whistled. Those are prime animals, Naylor. You sure you want to sell them? They'd be worth more once fully trained. I don't have the luxury of time, Nathan admitted. After some negotiation, they settled on a price. It wouldn't cover the entire debt to the bank, but it would show good faith and buy Nathan more time to figure out his next move. As he left Perkins's yard, he noticed a commotion near the schoolhouse. A crowd had gathered, and raised voices carried on the afternoon breeze. Curious and concerned, Nathan directed Rusty toward the disturbance. As he drew closer, he could make out Lillian standing on the schoolhouse steps, facing a red-faced man whose finger jabbed accusingly in her direction. Several parents stood nearby, along with a cluster of frightened-looking children, filling their heads with nonsense. The man was shouting as Nathan approached. My boy needs to learn practical skills, not fancy book learning and Eastern ideas. Lillian's posture was rigid, but her voice remained steady. Mr. Reynolds, every child deserves a complete education. Thomas has shown remarkable aptitude for mathematics and literature. He's destined for the mine, same as his pa, Reynolds cut in. What good are poems and sums down in the shaft? Nathan dismounted, tying Rusty to a nearby hitching post. He approached the group quietly, not wanting to escalate the situation but unwilling to leave Lillian to face the angry miner alone. Education is never wasted, Mr. Reynolds, Lillian continued firmly. And if Thomas chooses another path, there ain't no other path for the likes of us, Reynolds spat. You think you're doing these children favors, giving them ideas above their station. You're just setting them up for disappointment. Several parents murmured in agreement while others looked uncomfortable. Is there a problem here? Nathan asked, stepping into the circle. Reynolds turned his glare on Nathan. This ain't your concern, Naylor. When someone shouts at a lady in public, it becomes everyone's concern, Nathan replied evenly. Especially when children are present, the miner sneered. Of course you'd take her side. Rumor has it you've been sweet on the schoolmarm. Nathan felt his ears grow hot, but he kept his composure. This isn't about sides, Reynolds. It's about civility. If you have concerns about your son's education, perhaps you could discuss them without an audience. Lillian stepped forward. Mr. Naylor is right. I'm happy to speak with any parent privately about their child's progress and needs. But I will not be bullied into lowering my educational standards. Her quiet dignity seemed to deflate some of Reynolds's anger. After a moment of tense silence, the miner spat on the ground. "We'll continue this discussion another time, Miss Bentley," he muttered before stalking off. The crowd began to disperse, parents collecting their children and heading home. Nathan remained, watching as Lillian's shoulders sagged slightly once the confrontation ended. "Are you all right?" he asked as the last of the onlookers departed. She nodded, though her face was pale. "Thank you for intervening. Mr. Reynolds has been resistant to my teaching methods since I arrived." "Does this happen often?" "Occasionally," she admitted. Many of the miners see education as an unnecessary luxury. They expect their children to follow them into the mines or marry young. Nathan frowned. "That's short-sighted. It's born of generations of limited opportunity," Lillian said with surprising compassion. "They can't envision a different future because they've never seen one." They stood in silence for a moment before Lillian straightened her shoulders. "I should finish preparing for tomorrow's lessons. Would you allow me to walk you home afterward?" Nathan asked, surprising himself with the offer. "Just to ensure there are no further discussions." A small smile touched her lips. "That would be kind, thank you." "I'll be finished in about an hour." Nathan nodded. "I have some business to attend to. I'll return then." He used the time to visit the general store and send a telegram to a horse buyer he'd worked with in Denver. If he could get a fair price for a few more horses, he might be able to keep the ranch afloat a bit longer. When he returned to the schoolhouse, Lillian was just locking the door. She carried a satchel filled with papers and wore a simple shawl against the cooling evening air. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, and they fell into step together down the main street of Victor. The setting sun cast long shadows and bathed the buildings in a golden light. "Thank you again for your assistance earlier," Lillian said after they had walked a short distance. "It's not often someone stands up for the value of education in a mining town." "My father believed in learning," Nathan replied. "He only had schooling until he was 12, but he made sure I continued until 16. He used to say, a man needs to know more than just how to work with his hands." "Your father sounds like a wise man." He was, stubborn but wise. Nathan found himself smiling at the memory. "He would have liked you, I think. He had a soft spot for people who stood their ground." Lillian glanced up at him. "Is that what you see when you look at me?" "Someone who stands her ground," Nathan considered this. "That and someone who cares deeply about her purpose. It's admirable." A slight blush colored her cheeks. "And what about you, Nathan? What is your purpose now?" The question struck him deeply. For so long, his purpose had been working alongside his father, building a future for the ranch. Now he wasn't sure. "I'm still figuring that out," he said honestly. "Right now, I'm just trying to keep the ranch from the bank's hands." "Is it that serious?" He nodded. "Pa took out a loan last winter when he fell ill. Medical bills plus a bad season, it added up quickly." They had reached a small, neat boarding house near the church. Lillian paused at the gate. "This is where I stay," she said. "Mrs. Hendricks rents rooms to unmarried women in town." Nathan removed his hat. "Then I'll bid you good evening, Miss Bentley Lillian." She hesitated, then said, "Nathan, I don't mean to overstep, but there's a gathering at the church on Sunday after services. A potluck dinner. It might be good for you to join the community, especially now." The invitation was unexpected. Nathan hadn't been to church since his mother's funeral 15 years ago. His father had lost his faith that day, and Nathan had gradually drifted away from the practice. "I'm not much for social gatherings," he admitted. "Sometimes the things we're not much for are exactly what we need," she replied gently. "Besides, Mrs. Hendricks makes an excellent apple pie." The mention of pie brought a reluctant smile to his face. "I'll consider it." Lillian's answering smile was warm. "That's all I ask. Good night, Nathan." "Good night, Lillian." As he walked back toward where he'd left Rusty, Nathan found himself already planning to attend Sunday's gathering, despite his reservations. There was something about Lillian Bentley that made him want to step outside the isolation he'd built around himself. The church bell rang at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, calling the residents of Victor to worship. Nathan had spent extra time that morning ensuring his best shirt was properly ironed and his boots were polished. He felt slightly ridiculous taking such care with his appearance, but something drove him to present himself well. The small white church was nearly full when he arrived. He slipped into the back row, nodding politely to those who noticed his entrance. Several people looked surprised to see Samuel Naylor's son at the service, but no one commented. Reverend Michaels led the congregation through hymns and prayers before delivering a sermon on perseverance through hardship. Nathan found himself listening more attentively than he had expected, particularly when the Reverend spoke of finding new purpose after loss. Throughout the service, Nathan was acutely aware of Lillian's presence several rows ahead. She sat with the other unmarried women who boarded at Mrs. Hendricks's house, her auburn hair neatly arranged beneath a modest hat. Once, when the congregation rose for a hymn, she glanced back and caught his eye. The smile she offered was small but genuine, and Nathan felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. After the service, the congregation moved to tables set up outside under the shade of large cottonwood trees. Women bustled about, arranging dishes they had brought, while men gathered in small groups to discuss business and local matters. Nathan stood awkwardly at the edge of the gathering until Reverend Michaels approached him. "Mr. Naylor," the clergyman greeted, extending his hand. "It's good to see you here today. My condolences on your father's passing." "Thank you, Reverend," Nathan replied, shaking the offered hand. "It was a fine sermon. I hope it brought you some comfort." The older man's eyes were kind. "Your father was not a church-going man in his later years, but he was always welcome here, as are you." Before Nathan could respond, Mrs. Hendricks bustled over, a plate in her hands. "Mr. Naylor." "What a pleasant surprise to see you joining us today," she exclaimed. "Here, you must try some of my apple pie. Miss Bentley mentioned it was part of her persuasion to get you here." Nathan accepted the plate with thanks, his ears warming at the implication that Lillian had discussed him with her landlady. "Speaking of Miss Bentley," Mrs. Hendricks continued, glancing around, "she was looking for you earlier. I believe she's over by the lemonade table." With a knowing smile, the landlady moved on to offer pie to other congregants. Reverend Michaels excused himself as well, leaving Nathan to navigate the social gathering alone. He spotted Lillian pouring lemonade for two young girls, her face animated as she chatted with them. When she noticed him approaching, her expression brightened. "You came," she said when the girls had run off with their drinks. "I did," he confirmed. "Mrs. Hendricks already found me with her pie," Lillian laughed. "She's quite determined that everyone taste it. Is it as good as I promised?" Nathan took a bite, nodding appreciatively. "Better, actually." For the next hour, Nathan found himself drawn into the community in a way he hadn't been since his father's illness had begun 2 years prior. Lillian introduced him to several families, including parents of her students who expressed genuine interest in his ranch. "Mr. Naylor breeds some of the finest horses in the county," Lillian told Mr. Thompson, who owned the hardware store. "Is that so?" Thompson replied. "My eldest boy's been pestering me for a mount of his own. He's 14 now, old enough for the responsibility, I reckon." Before Nathan knew it, he had arranged for Thompson to visit the ranch the following week to look at a suitable horse for his son. Similar conversations led to potential business with others in the community, and Nathan began to see possibilities he hadn't considered before. As the gathering wound down in the late afternoon, Nathan found himself seated beside Lillian on a bench beneath one of the cottonwoods. "Thank you for encouraging me to come today," he said, watching as the last few families gathered their dishes and children. "You're welcome," she replied. "Though I suspect the community is more grateful than I am, you've made quite an impression." Nathan shrugged. "I've just been talking about horses and cattle." "You've been connecting," Lillian corrected gently. Victor may be growing, but it's still a community that values personal relationships. Your father was well respected but somewhat removed in recent years. People are glad to see you engaging." He considered this. "I never thought of it that way. Pa always handled the social aspects of our business. I preferred working with the animals. Yet you seem quite comfortable today." "I had a good guide," he replied, meeting her gaze. A light blush colored her cheeks and she looked away. "I should help with the cleanup," she said, rising from the bench. Nathan stood as well. "May I walk you home afterward?" Lillian's smile was answer enough. As they helped clear tables and stack dishes, Nathan found himself watching Lillian interact with the townsfolk. She knew everyone by name, asked after specific family members, and offered genuine interest in their responses. It was no wonder the community had embraced her, despite occasional resistance from those like Reynolds. When the cleanup was complete, they walked together toward Mrs. Hendricks's boarding house. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dirt road, and a pleasant breeze carried the scent of pine from the surrounding hills. "You mentioned your mother passed away when you were young," Lillian said as they walked. "If you don't mind me asking, what was she like?" Nathan was surprised to find that the question didn't bring the usual pang of sadness. "She was gentle, but strong. She could calm the wildest horse with just her voice and taught me to read before I ever set foot in a schoolhouse. She loved music. She played the piano we had in the cabin until..." "Until," Lillian prompted softly when he fell silent, "until she got sick. Consumption, like your parents. It took her quickly." He paused. "Pa sold the piano after she died. Said the silence was better than having it sit there unplayed." Lillian's hand brushed his arm sympathetically. "I'm sorry, Nathan." "It was a long time ago," he said, though the memory of the day the piano was taken away remained vivid in his mind. They reached the boarding house gate and Lillian turned to face him. "Thank you for coming today and for walking me home." "The pleasure was mine," he replied, and found that he meant it sincerely. She hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to join me for supper tomorrow evening, Mrs. Hendricks allows her boarders to have guests in the parlor occasionally, nothing formal, just a meal together." The invitation caught him by surprise, but Nathan found himself nodding. "I'd like that very much." Lillian's smile was radiant. "Wonderful, 6 o'clock, I'll be here." As he rode back to the ranch, Nathan realized he was looking forward to tomorrow evening with an eagerness he hadn't felt in years. The weight of his father's death and the ranch's precarious situation hadn't lifted, but somehow it seemed more manageable than it had just days ago. The next day, Nathan threw himself into his work with renewed energy. He spent the morning inspecting the remaining horses, selecting which ones he might offer to the buyers who had expressed interest at the church gathering. In the afternoon, he rode the property lines, noting where fences needed repair and which pastures could support more grazing. By late afternoon, he had developed the beginnings of a plan. If he could sell a few more horses at fair prices, reduce the cattle herd to a more manageable size for one man to handle, and perhaps lease a portion of the land to a neighboring rancher, he might be able to keep the core of the double N intact while rebuilding slowly. As the sun began to lower in the western sky, he returned to the cabin to clean up for his supper with Lillian. He bathed thoroughly, shaved with extra care, and donned his best shirt and trousers. Looking in the small mirror above the wash basin, he barely recognized himself. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes since his father's passing had diminished somewhat. At precisely 6 o'clock, Nathan knocked on the door of Mrs. Hendricks's boarding house, a small bouquet of wildflowers in hand. The landlady herself answered, her expression moving from polite welcome to delighted surprise as she recognized him. "Mr. Naylor, right on time," she exclaimed, ushering him inside. "Miss Bentley mentioned you would be joining us this evening. What lovely flowers." Nathan removed his hat as he stepped into the tidy foyer. "Good evening, Mrs. Hendricks. Thank you for allowing me to dine here tonight." "Think nothing of it," she replied, taking his hat and hanging it on a hook by the door. It's nice to see Miss Bentley entertaining. She works too hard, in my opinion. She led him into a cozy parlor where a table had been set for two by the window. The room was modestly furnished but comfortable, with shelves of books lining one wall and a small piano in the corner. "Please, make yourself comfortable," Mrs. Hendricks said. "Miss Bentley will be down shortly." Left alone, Nathan wandered to the bookshelf, examining the titles with interest. Many were educational texts, but others were novels and collections of poetry. He was so absorbed in his perusal that he didn't hear Lillian enter until she spoke. "You enjoy reading, Nathan?" He turned to find her standing in the doorway, wearing a simple but becoming dress of deep blue. Her hair was arranged more elaborately than he'd seen it before, with soft curls framing her face. "When I have the time," he answered, suddenly aware of the wildflowers still in his hand. "These are for you," he added, crossing the room to offer them to her. Lillian's face lit up as she accepted the bouquet. "They're beautiful, thank you." "Not as beautiful as you," he said before he could stop himself. A becoming blush spread across her cheeks. "You're very kind, Mrs." Hendricks bustled in with a vase of water, saving them both from the moment of awkward silence that followed. "Let me take those for you, dear. You two sit and enjoy your meal while it's hot." They took their places at the table as Mrs. Hendricks brought in covered dishes. The meal was simple but well prepared. Roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and early summer vegetables from her garden. "This looks wonderful," Nathan commented as Mrs. Hendricks poured water into their glasses. "Miss Bentley helped with the vegetables," the landlady said with a wink before withdrawing to the kitchen. As they began to eat, Nathan found himself more at ease than he had expected. Lillian asked about his day, and he shared his developing plans for the ranch. "It sounds like yesterday's gathering was productive for you," she observed, breaking a piece of bread. "It was," he admitted. "I hadn't realized how isolated I'd become. My father's illness required most of my attention these past 2 years, and I neglected the business connections he had built." "But you're rebuilding them now," Nathan nodded. "Thanks to your encouragement." Their conversation flowed naturally as they ate, covering topics from books they had read to memories of their childhoods. Nathan found himself sharing stories about growing up on the ranch that he hadn't recalled in years, his first time breaking a horse, fishing trips with his father in the stream that ran through their property. The wild fox kit he had secretly fed until it was strong enough to return to the hills. In turn, Lillian told him about her journey west with her parents as a young girl, her education in a boarding school in Denver after her father struck a modest silver claim, and her decision to return to Victor to teach after her mother's death. "I could have stayed in Denver," she explained. "I had offers to teach in more established schools there, but something drew me back here." "What was it?" Nathan asked, genuinely curious. Lillian considered the question. "I think it was the memory of how my father loved this place. Despite its hardships, he saw possibility here. And I wanted to be part of creating those possibilities for others." Her dedication to her calling impressed Nathan deeply. "The children of Victor are fortunate to have you," he said sincerely. "After the meal, Mrs. Hendricks brought in apple pie for dessert, insisting on serving them herself before retiring to give them privacy. "She seems very fond of you," Nathan observed once the landlady had left. Lillian smiled. "Mrs. Hendricks has been like a surrogate mother to me since I returned. She keeps a watchful eye on all her girls, as she calls us boarders, including approving your suitors." The word suitor hung between them, neither acknowledging nor dismissing its implication. "She has opinions on everyone in town," Lillian replied diplomatically. "Though she has been unusually enthusiastic about your visit." Their eyes met across the table, and Nathan felt a connection that went beyond mere conversation. There was an understanding between them, a recognition of shared values despite their different paths in life. When the evening drew to a close, Nathan reluctantly rose to leave. "Thank you for inviting me," he said as they stood in the foyer. "I can't remember when I've enjoyed a meal more." "Thank you for accepting," Lillian replied, her hands clasped before her. "Perhaps we could do this again." "I'd like that very much." He hesitated, then added, "Would you consider joining me for a ride this Saturday? I could show you the ranch if you're interested." Her face brightened. "I would enjoy that." As Nathan rode home under the star-filled sky, he felt lighter than he had in months. The problems facing him remained substantial: the bank debt, the reduced herd, the work that needed 2 men but had only 1, but somehow they no longer seemed insurmountable. The week passed quickly, filled with hard work and increasing interaction with the townsfolk. Nathan sold 2 horses to families from church and arranged to lease 20 acres of his land to Jack Peterson, whose own ranch bordered the Double N. By Saturday morning, he had made enough progress to justify taking time away from his chores. He rode into town earlier than arranged, carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. His first stop was the bank, where he paid a portion of his father's debt and negotiated more favorable terms for the remainder. Mr. Holloway seemed genuinely surprised by Nathan's changed circumstances. "Your father would be proud to see you taking hold of things this way," the banker commented as he updated the loan documents. "I hope so," Nathan replied. "He built the Double N from nothing. I aim to preserve what I can of his legacy." His next stop was the general store, where he collected a few items for the picnic lunch he had planned. Mrs. Wilson, the proprietor's wife, packed everything neatly in a basket. "It's nice to see you courting, Nathan," she said with a warm smile as she handed him the basket. "Miss Bentley is a lovely young woman." Nathan felt his ears grow hot. "We're just friends, Mrs. Wilson." The older woman's knowing look said she believed otherwise, but she merely nodded. "Of course, enjoy your ride." When he arrived at Mrs. Hendricks's boarding house, Lillian was waiting on the porch. She wore a practical riding skirt and jacket, her hair braided and tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Nathan thought she had never looked more beautiful. "Good morning," he greeted, dismounting to help her down the steps. "I've brought something for you." He offered her the paper-wrapped package. Lillian accepted it with a questioning look. "Open it," he encouraged. She carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a pair of soft leather riding gloves. "Nathan, these are lovely." "I noticed you didn't have any at the cemetery," he explained. "Every proper rider needs good gloves." "Thank you." She slipped them on, flexing her fingers to feel the supple leather. "They fit perfectly, Mrs. Hendricks had arranged for Lillian to borrow a gentle mare named Daisy from the livery. Nathan helped her mount, then secured the picnic basket to his own saddle before swinging up onto Rusty. They rode side by side out of town, heading north toward the foothills where the Double N was situated. The day was perfect for riding: clear skies, a light breeze, and the landscape vibrant with early summer growth. "You ride well," Nathan observed as they followed the winding dirt road. Lillian smiled. "My father insisted I learn." He said a person never knows when they might need to cover ground quickly in this country. Wise man. As they approached the ranch, Nathan found himself seeing it through new eyes. The weathered sign bearing the Double N brand hung slightly askew at the entrance to the property. The fences, while functional, showed signs of neglect in places. The cabin itself was solid but plain, with a sagging porch step he'd been meaning to fix. Yet there was beauty here too: the meadows dotted with wildflowers, the clear stream that provided water for the stock, the distant mountains framing the landscape in majestic splendor. "It's not much," he said as they rode through the gate, "but it's home." Lillian took in the scene with appreciative eyes. "It's wonderful, Nathan, so open and free." He guided her around the property, showing her the barn where his father had bred and trained horses, the small orchard his mother had planted years ago, and the ridge where he often sat to watch the sunset. The cattle grazed contentedly in the distance while several horses approached the fence, curious about the visitors. "This is Starlight," Nathan said as a black mare with a white blaze trotted over. "My father's pride. She's produced some of our finest foals." Lillian extended her hand, allowing the horse to sniff her before gently stroking the animal's neck. "She's magnificent." "She knows it, too," Nathan chuckled. "Prima donna of the pasture." They continued their tour, ending at a grassy knoll overlooking the stream. Nathan spread a blanket from his saddlebag and unpacked the picnic lunch: fresh bread, cheese, cold chicken, and ripe strawberries for dessert. As they ate, Lillian asked thoughtful questions about ranching, genuinely interested in understanding his world. In turn, Nathan found himself curious about her teaching methods and the challenges she faced. "What will you do during the summer months?" he asked as they finished the strawberries. "School must be ending soon." "Next week is the final day," Lillian confirmed. "I'll stay in Victor. There's a group of older students who want to continue lessons through the summer, and I'm organizing a small lending library for the town." "No travels planned, no family to visit," she shook her head. "No family left, I'm afraid. My parents were both only children, and my grandparents are long gone." Nathan was struck by the realization that they were alike in this way, both alone in the world, yet neither of them seemed truly lonely at this moment. "What about you?" Lillian asked. "Will the ranch keep you too busy for recreation this summer?" "Mostly," he admitted, "though I hope to make time for certain activities." "Such as," his eyes met hers, "such as riding with a certain schoolteacher if she's willing." Lillian's smile was answer enough. They packed up the remains of their picnic as clouds began to gather on the western horizon. Nathan glanced at the sky with a practiced eye. "We should head back," he said. "That looks like a summer storm brewing." They mounted their horses and set off toward town, riding at a brisker pace than before. The wind had picked up, and the scent of rain hung in the air. They were about halfway to Victor when the first large drops began to fall. Within minutes, the gentle rain transformed into a downpour. Lillian's borrowed mare grew nervous at a crack of thunder, sidestepping anxiously. "There's an old line shack just ahead," Nathan called over the rain. "We can wait out the worst of it there." He led the way off the main trail, following a nearly overgrown path through a stand of pines. The line shack, a simple one-room structure used by ranch hands during roundups, came into view as lightning illuminated the darkening landscape. They dismounted quickly, leading the horses to the meager shelter of the shack's overhang. Nathan helped Lillian inside before returning to secure the animals. When he entered the shack, soaked to the skin, he found Lillian removing her dripping hat and jacket. The small space was dusty but dry, with a rough table, 2 chairs, a narrow cot, and a cold stove. "I'm sorry about this," Nathan said, running a hand through his wet hair. "I should have paid more attention to the weather." Lillian shook out her braid, which had partly come undone in the rain. "Don't apologize. I find summer storms rather exciting, to be honest." Nathan smiled, struck by her resilience. Most women of his acquaintance would have been distressed by the situation, but Lillian seemed to take it in stride. "Let me see if there's anything useful here," he said, checking the shelves above the stove. He found matches, a few candles, and some dry kindling stored in a tin box. "We're in luck. I can at least get a small fire going to warm us up." As he knelt to light the stove, Lillian moved to the single window, wiping condensation from the glass to peer outside. "It's really coming down," she observed. "I hope Mrs. Hendricks won't worry." "She seems like a sensible woman," Nathan replied, coaxing a small flame from the kindling. "She'll understand we sought shelter." Once the fire was going, the small space quickly warmed. Nathan found an old coffee pot and 2 tin cups, surprisingly clean considering the disuse of the shack. "No coffee, I'm afraid," he said, "but I can heat some water if you'd like." Lillian had seated herself at the table, attempting to restore order to her braid. "That would be lovely, thank you." Nathan filled the pot with water from his canteen and set it on the stove. As he turned back to Lillian, he was struck by how the simple act of arranging her hair could be so captivating. Her fingers moved deftly through the damp strands, her face a study in concentration. "You're staring, Mr. Naylor," she said without looking up, though a smile played at the corners of her mouth. "You're worth staring at, Miss Bentley," he replied honestly. Her fingers paused momentarily and a blush spread across her cheeks. "Such flattery, not flattery, truth." The water began to steam, and Nathan busied himself pouring it into the cups. He had a few tea leaves wrapped in paper in his saddlebag, which he divided between them. They sat across from each other at the small table, warming their hands on the cups and listening to the rain hammer against the roof. Thunder rolled in the distance, and the wind whistled through the cracks in the walls. "Thank you for today," Lillian said after a comfortable silence. "For showing me your home. Thank you for coming. It's been lonely there since Pa died." She reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. "I understand loneliness." Nathan turned his palm upward, capturing her fingers in his. "Less so these days, I hope." "Much less," she admitted softly. They remained that way, hands linked across the table as the storm raged outside. There was something intimate about the moment, not improper, but deeply personal, as if they were sharing more than just shelter from the rain. Eventually, the downpour lessened to a steady patter and the thunder receded. Nathan reluctantly released Lillian's hand and moved to the window. "The worst has passed," he said. "We should be able to make it back to town before dark." Lillian nodded, gathering her things. "Of course." As they prepared to leave, Nathan noticed her shiver slightly despite the warmth from the stove. Without hesitation, he removed his coat, which had begun to dry, and placed it around her shoulders. "Nathan, you'll be cold," she protested. "I'm used to the elements," he assured her. "And we can't have Victor's schoolteacher catching a chill." The ride back to town was wet but uneventful. The rain had settled into a gentle mist, and the freshly washed landscape glistened in the late afternoon light. They rode mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable one, filled with unspoken understanding. When they reached Mrs. Hendricks's boarding house, the landlady was waiting on the porch, concern evident on her face. "There you are," she exclaimed as they dismounted. "I was beginning to worry." "We got caught in the storm and took shelter," Lillian explained, handing Nathan back his coat. "Mr. Naylor was a perfect gentleman." Mrs. Hendricks nodded approvingly. "Well, come inside and get dry before you catch your death." "Mr. Naylor, there's coffee on the stove if you'd like some before you head home." Nathan accepted the invitation gratefully. As Lillian went upstairs to change, he sat in the kitchen with Mrs. Hendricks, who provided him with a towel for his hair and insisted on feeding him a bowl of stew. "That girl has been happier this past week than I've seen her in all the time she's been boarding here," the landlady commented as she refilled his coffee cup. Nathan wasn't sure how to respond to the observation. "She's special, that one," Mrs. Hendricks continued. "Plenty of young men in town have tried to court her, but she's never shown interest in any of them." "I'm honored by her friendship," Nathan said carefully. Mrs. Hendricks gave him a knowing look. "Friendship, is it? Well, whatever you call it, it suits you both." When Lillian returned, dressed in dry clothes with her hair neatly arranged, Nathan rose to take his leave. Mrs. Hendricks discreetly busied herself in the pantry, giving them a moment of privacy in the foyer. "Thank you again for today," Lillian said. "Despite the rain, it was wonderful." "May I call on you again?" Nathan asked. "Perhaps next Sunday after church." Her smile was radiant. "I'd like that very much." As he rode home in the gathering dusk, Nathan found himself humming a tune his mother used to sing, something he hadn't done in years. The ranch still faced challenges, and the grief of his father's passing hadn't fully abated, but for the first time since Samuel Naylor's death, his son felt hope for the future. Summer unfolded in a series of golden days and star-filled nights. Nathan divided his time between working the ranch and courting Lillian properly. Each Sunday after church, they would spend the afternoon together, sometimes riding, sometimes walking along the creek that ran through town, and occasionally joining other young couples for social gatherings. Nathan made steady progress with the ranch's finances. By mid-July, he had paid half of his father's debt and negotiated favorable terms for the remainder. The reduced herd was easier to manage, and the horses he kept were of the finest quality, attracting buyers from as far as Denver and Colorado Springs. Lillian's summer students, 6 teenagers who hoped to continue their education beyond the basic schooling offered in Victor, met 3 mornings a week. On those afternoons, she often rode out to the Double N, where Nathan would pause in his work to share lemonade on the porch or show her new foals in the pasture. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Nathan found himself confiding in Lillian about his hopes and fears for the ranch, while she shared her dreams of expanding educational opportunities in the growing mining town. "The town council is considering building a proper schoolhouse," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch swing he had repaired and installed for her visits. "With 2 rooms, one for the younger children and one for the older students." "That would be a significant improvement," Nathan agreed, watching as the setting sun painted the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "They've asked if I would be willing to stay on permanently," Lillian continued, a hint of uncertainty in her voice, "to oversee the expanded school." Nathan felt a surge of conflicting emotions: joy that she might remain in Victor, concern that she might feel obligated to accept a position she didn't truly want. "Is that what you want?" he asked carefully. Lillian was silent for a moment, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the fabric of her skirt. "I think it is," she finally said. "I've come to love this community despite its challenges, or perhaps because of them." Her gaze met his, and the unspoken question hung between them. Was there another reason she might want to stay? Nathan took her hand gently in his. "Victor would be fortunate to keep you," he said. "As would I." The weeks passed, and August brought with it the town's annual harvest festival. Though the actual harvest was still a few weeks away, the celebration had evolved into a community tradition that drew people from neighboring settlements for a weekend of contests, dances, and socializing. Nathan had never participated much in previous years, but this year, he found himself enlisted to help with everything from setting up the dance platform in the town square to judging the horse races. Lillian, as the town schoolteacher, was equally involved, organizing children's activities and helping with the baking contest. The Saturday of the festival dawned clear and warm. Nathan spent the morning at the ranch, completing necessary chores before donning his best clothes for the day's events. As he buttoned his freshly pressed shirt, he glanced at the small box on his dresser, a ring that had belonged to his mother, which his father had preserved all these years in a drawer. Last night, after much consideration, Nathan had retrieved it, polishing the simple gold band with its modest diamond until it gleamed. He wasn't certain today was the right moment, but he tucked the box into his pocket nonetheless. When the time came, he wanted to be prepared. The town was transformed when he arrived. Colorful bunting hung from buildings, and stalls lined the main street offering everything from handcrafted goods to home-baked treats. Children darted through the crowds, their laughter rising above the general din of conversation and music from a small band playing near the dance platform. Nathan found Lillian at the schoolhouse, where she was organizing teams for the children's relay races. She wore a pretty dress of light green that complemented her auburn hair, which was arranged in a more elaborate style than usual for the special occasion. "You look beautiful," he said by way of greeting. Her smile was warm as she turned to him. "And you look very handsome, Mr. Naylor. Are you nearly finished here? I thought we might walk through the festival together before I'm due at the horse races." "Just one moment," she replied, turning back to assign the final children to their teams. As they walked among the stalls, many people greeted them warmly. Nathan was struck by how much had changed in just a few months. Where once he had been the solitary rancher who rarely came to town, he was now an active member of the community, largely due to Lillian's influence. They paused at Mrs. Wilson's pie stall, where the shopkeeper's wife insisted on giving them each a slice of her famous cherry pie. "On the house," she said with a wink. "For the town's favorite couple." Nathan felt his ears grow hot, but Lillian merely laughed and thanked her graciously. As the afternoon progressed, Nathan was called away to help with the horse races. Lillian promised to watch from the sidelines and went to join Mrs. Hendricks and some of the other women from the boarding house. The races were a highlight of the festival, with riders from throughout the region competing for modest prizes and significant bragging rights. Nathan, known for his fairness and knowledge of horses, had been asked to serve as one of the judges. From his position near the finish line, he could see Lillian in the crowd, her green dress visible among the spectators. Several times during lulls in the racing, he caught her eye and was rewarded with a smile that made his heart beat faster. When the races concluded with Jack Peterson's son taking the top prize on a horse bred at the Double N, much to Nathan's satisfaction, he found Lillian waiting for him at the edge of the field. "Your horse performed admirably," she said, taking his offered arm as they walked back toward the town center. "Bobby Peterson has a good hand with animals," Nathan replied, "and his father paid a fair price for that gelding." As evening approached, lanterns were lit throughout the town square and the band began playing livelier tunes for dancing. Couples of all ages gathered on the wooden platform, swirling to the music under the starlit sky. Nathan, who had never been much of a dancer, found himself leading Lillian onto the floor nonetheless. His father had taught him the basics years ago, insisting it was a skill a man should possess, and Nathan was grateful for those lessons now. "You dance well for a cowboy," Lillian teased as they moved together to the music. "I have an excellent partner," he replied, enjoying the way the lantern light played across her features. They danced several numbers before stepping aside to catch their breath. Nathan fetched them cups of punch, and they found a quiet spot at the edge of the square to watch the continuing festivities. "Are you enjoying the festival?" he asked, noticing how the dancing had brought a becoming flush to her cheeks. "Very much," she replied. "It's wonderful to see the whole community together like this." Nathan nodded in agreement, his hand unconsciously touching the small box in his pocket. The moment felt right, yet he hesitated, uncertain of the proper setting for what he wished to ask. "Lillian," he began, his voice more serious than before, "there's something I'd like to discuss with you." She turned to him, her expression curious. "What is it?" Before he could continue, they were interrupted by the arrival of Reverend Michaels, who was circulating through the crowd to greet his parishioners. "Miss Bentley, Mr. Naylor," the clergyman said warmly. "What a pleasure to see you both enjoying the festivities." They chatted briefly with the Reverend, who eventually moved on to speak with others. By then, the band had started a new set, and several of Lillian's students approached, eager to show their teacher the prizes they had won in various contests. The moment had passed, and Nathan resigned himself to waiting for another opportunity. Perhaps it was for the best a public proposal might have been too forward, despite the growing closeness between them. As the night drew to a close, Nathan walked Lillian back to her boarding house. The streets were quieter now, most of the festival goers having returned home or retired to the saloon for continued celebration. "Thank you for a wonderful day," Lillian said as they reached Mrs. Hendricks's gate. "Thank you for sharing it with me," Nathan replied. He hesitated, then added, "Would you like to join me for dinner tomorrow evening at the ranch?" Lillian's eyebrows rose slightly. "At the ranch? I thought I might cook for you for a change," he explained. "Nothing fancy but private." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by a soft smile. "I would like that very much." Nathan's heart raced at her acceptance. "I'll come for you around 4 then. I'll be ready." Impulsively, he leaned down and brushed his lips gently against her cheek. "Good night, Lillian." "Good night, Nathan," she whispered, her fingers touching the spot where his lips had been. As he rode home under the star-filled sky, Nathan felt a sense of rightness settle over him. Tomorrow, he would ask Lillian Bentley to be his wife. The thought filled him with both nervousness and profound joy. Sunday dawned bright and clear. Nathan spent the morning preparing the cabin for Lillian's visit. He swept the floors, polished the modest furniture, and even arranged wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table. The simple meal he planned, roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables from his small garden, was within his limited cooking abilities but respectable enough for the occasion. By mid-afternoon, everything was ready. Nathan bathed and dressed with care, choosing his Sunday clothes and taking extra time with his appearance. Before leaving for town, he retrieved his mother's ring from its box once more, holding it to the light. The diamond was small but clear, set in a band of gold that had been carefully maintained despite the years. He arrived at Mrs. Hendricks's boarding house precisely at 4 o'clock. Lillian was waiting on the porch, wearing a becoming dress of deep blue that Nathan hadn't seen before. Her hair was arranged simply but elegantly, with a few curls framing her face. "You look beautiful," he said as he helped her into the buggy he had borrowed for the occasion, wanting to provide a more comfortable ride than horseback. "Thank you," she replied, settling her skirts around her. "You look quite handsome yourself." The drive to the ranch was filled with easy conversation. Lillian told him about her plans for the upcoming school year, and Nathan shared news of a promising offer he'd received for 2 of his yearlings. As they approached the Double N, Nathan found himself seeing it through Lillian's eyes once more: the weathered sign, the modest cabin, the sprawling pastures with grazing cattle and horses. It was a working ranch, not a grand estate, but it was his home, and he hoped it might soon be hers as well. "I've made some improvements since your last visit," he said as he helped her down from the buggy. Indeed, the porch step had been repaired, the exterior of the cabin freshly whitewashed, and a small garden of flowers planted along the walkway, touches he had added with Lillian in mind. "It looks wonderful," she said, her appreciative gaze taking in the changes. Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting. Nathan had lit lamps in anticipation of their arrival, and the aroma of the roasting beef filled the air. Lillian moved around the main room, examining the bookshelves, the stone fireplace, and the simple furnishings with genuine interest. "This was my mother's," Nathan explained when she paused before a small painting of a mountain landscape. "She brought it from back east when she married my father." "It's lovely," Lillian said softly. "You can see the care in every brushstroke." Nathan showed her the rest of the cabin, the kitchen where dinner was cooking, the small study that had been his father's retreat, and briefly, the 2 bedrooms down the short hallway. "It's not large," he acknowledged, "but my father built it solid. He always said a home wasn't about size but about what happened within its walls." Lillian's eyes met his. "Your father was a wise man." They returned to the kitchen, where Nathan busied himself with finishing the meal preparations. To his surprise and delight, Lillian insisted on helping, and they worked together comfortably, as if they had done so countless times before. When everything was ready, Nathan led her to the table he had set with his mother's china, simple white plates with a blue border that had been used only on special occasions during his childhood. "This is wonderful, Nathan," Lillian said as he served her portion of the roast. "I'm impressed with your cooking skills." "My father made sure I could fend for myself," he replied with a smile, "though I can't claim to be an expert." The meal was indeed simple but well prepared. They ate by lamplight, the golden glow casting warm shadows across the table. Their conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences that required no filling. After they had finished and cleared away the dishes together, Lillian, again insisting on helping Nathan, suggested they sit on the porch to watch the sunset. He brought out 2 cups of coffee and a slice of apple pie he had purchased from Mrs. Wilson specifically for this occasion. The porch faced west, providing a perfect view of the mountains as the setting sun painted them in brilliant hues of orange and gold. Sitting beside Lillian on the bench he had built, Nathan felt a sense of completion he had never experienced before. "Lillian," he began, setting his coffee cup aside, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." She turned to face him, her expression open and expectant. "Yes." Nathan took a deep breath, gathering his courage. These past few months have been the happiest of my life, despite starting with the sorrow of my father's passing. You brought light back into my world when I thought it had gone dark forever." Her eyes softened, and she reached for his hand. "You've brought joy to my life as well, Nathan." Encouraged, he continued, "I know we haven't known each other very long, and I don't have much to offer except this ranch and my promise to work hard every day to make a good life. But I love you, Lillian Bentley, and I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." As he spoke the final words, he withdrew the small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing his mother's ring. Lillian's eyes widened, first at his declaration and then at the sight of the ring. For a moment she was silent, and Nathan felt a flicker of uncertainty. Then, tears glistening in her eyes, she smiled. "Yes, Nathan. Yes, I will marry you." Relief and joy flooded through him as he gently slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit nearly perfectly, a good omen, he thought. "It was my mother's," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "My father kept it all these years. I think they would have approved of you wearing it now." "I will treasure it," Lillian promised, looking down at the ring on her hand before meeting his gaze once more. "I love you, Nathan Naylor." The words he had longed to hear washed over him like a benediction. Gently, he cupped her face in his hands and leaned forward to kiss her, their first true kiss, filled with promise and devotion. When they finally parted, the sun had dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in deepening shades of purple. Stars were beginning to appear, bright pinpricks of light in the vast canvas above. "When?" Nathan asked softly, his arms still around her. Lillian considered the question. "The school term begins in September. Perhaps October, when harvest is complete. That would give us time to prepare." "October," he agreed, the word a pledge. "I'll speak to Reverend Michaels tomorrow." They sat together as full darkness descended, making plans for their shared future. Lillian would continue teaching, at least for the coming year, and they would live at the ranch, perhaps expanding the cabin eventually as their family grew. "I never thought I would find this," Lillian confessed as the evening grew cool and they prepared to return to town. "After my parents died, I resigned myself to a life of independence. I wasn't unhappy, but I was incomplete somehow." "I understand," Nathan replied, thinking of the emptiness he had felt after his father's passing. "It's as if a piece of myself was missing until I met you." The drive back to Victor was quiet but companionable, their hands linked between them on the buggy seat. The town was peaceful, most residents already retired for the night after the festivities of the previous day. When they reached Mrs. Hendricks's boarding house, the landlady was waiting up, clearly curious about their evening. Her face broke into a broad smile when Lillian showed her the ring. "Oh, my dears," she exclaimed, embracing first Lillian, then a somewhat startled Nathan. "What wonderful news! We must celebrate." Despite the late hour, Mrs. Hendricks insisted on opening a bottle of blackberry wine she had been saving for a special occasion. The three of them toasted the engagement, with Mrs. Hendricks offering heartfelt congratulations and immediately beginning to discuss wedding preparations. "Nothing too elaborate," Lillian insisted with a gentle smile at Nathan, "just family and friends." "You'll be married from the church, of course," Mrs. Hendricks continued, already planning. "And the reception could be held at the town hall. Oh, and your dress. We must begin working on that right away." Eventually, Nathan took his leave, kissing Lillian chastely on the cheek under Mrs. Hendricks's watchful eye. As he rode home under the starry sky, his heart felt lighter than it had in years. The future, which had seemed so uncertain following his father's death, now stretched before him, filled with promise and hope. The following day, Nathan spoke with Reverend Michaels, who readily agreed to perform the ceremony in October. News of the engagement spread quickly through Victor, met with general approval and good wishes. The town had watched their courtship unfold and seemed genuinely pleased by its culmination. The weeks that followed were busy ones. Nathan threw himself into preparing the ranch for Lillian's arrival. He repainted the interior of the cabin, repaired things that had long been neglected, and with Jack Peterson's help, built a new dresser for the bedroom that would soon be theirs. Lillian began the new school term with 29 students, including several who had just arrived with families drawn to the expanding mining operations. In her free time, she worked with Mrs. Hendricks and several other women from the church on her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory satin with delicate lace trim. October arrived with a blaze of autumn color. The aspen trees in the hills turned golden, contrasting beautifully with the deep green of the pines. The weather remained fair, with cool nights and warm days perfect for completing the harvest. On the morning of their wedding day, the second Saturday of the month, Nathan woke with the dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep. He completed his chores with meticulous care, then bathed and dressed in the new suit he had purchased in Denver specifically for the occasion. As he prepared to leave for the church, he paused at his father's grave, which he had visited regularly since that fateful day when Lillian had first approached him with her handkerchief. "I wish you could be here today, Pa," he said quietly, "but I think you'd approve. She's special, kind, and strong like Ma was. I promise to make you proud." The church was filled to capacity when he arrived. It seemed that everyone in Victor had turned out for the wedding, a testament to how well regarded both he and Lillian had become in the community. Nathan stood at the altar with Jack Peterson, who had agreed to serve as his best man. His heart pounded as the small church orchestra consisting of a piano, violin, and flute began to play the wedding march. The congregation rose and all heads turned toward the door. Nathan's breath caught in his throat as Lillian appeared, walking slowly down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Thompson, the hardware store owner who had offered to give her away in the absence of her father. Her dress was perfect, simple yet elegant, enhancing her natural beauty without overwhelming it. Her auburn hair was arranged in soft curls beneath a veil adorned with tiny white flowers. She carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers tied with a blue ribbon. As she reached the altar and took her place beside him, Nathan couldn't help but whisper, "You are the most beautiful sight I've ever seen." Her answering smile was radiant. Reverend Michaels conducted the ceremony with warmth and solemnity. When the time came for their vows, Nathan spoke with a clear voice, his eyes never leaving Lillian's. "I, Nathan James Naylor, take you, Lillian Grace Bentley, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Lillian's voice was equally steady as she repeated the ancient promises, her hands warm in his. When Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed his bride with reverence and joy, barely hearing the applause that erupted from the congregation. The reception at the town hall was a jubilant affair. The women of the church had outdone themselves with the feast, and the same small orchestra that had played for the ceremony provided music for dancing. Nathan, who had once avoided such gatherings, found himself thoroughly enjoying the celebration of their union. As evening approached, they prepared to depart for their honeymoon a week at a small cabin in the mountains that belonged to a friend of Jack Peterson's. Nathan had arranged for a neighbor boy to look after the ranch in his absence, ensuring that all would be well during their time away. They changed into traveling clothes and emerged from the town hall to find the community gathered outside, ready to shower them with rice and good wishes. Rusty and Daisy, both groomed to perfection, were hitched to the buggy, which had been decorated with ribbons and a sign reading "Just Married," painted in Jack Peterson's distinctive handwriting. Amid cheers and calls of congratulations, Nathan helped Lillian into the buggy and took his place beside her. With a final wave to their friends, they set off toward their mountain retreat, the sunset painting the road ahead in gold. The cabin, while rustic, was clean and comfortable, set in a clearing overlooking a small, crystal-clear lake. Nathan had arranged for supplies to be delivered ahead of their arrival, ensuring they would want for nothing during their week together. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered a new dimension to their love, a physical expression of the emotional bond they had formed over the months of their courtship. Nathan was gentle and considerate, Lillian responsive and loving, and together they found a harmony that transcended words. Later, as they lay in each other's arms watching moonlight filter through the cabin window, Lillian traced the lines of Nathan's face with tender fingers. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she whispered. Nathan caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Nor I." "You've brought joy back into my life, Lillian Naylor." The sound of her new name brought a smile to her lips. "I love you, husband, and I love you, wife," he replied, drawing her close once more. Their week in the mountains passed too quickly, filled with lazy mornings, walks around the lake, simple meals shared by firelight, and nights of discovery and deepening love. By the time they returned to the Double N, now their shared home, they had settled into a comfortable rhythm as a married couple. Lillian continued teaching, riding to and from town each day on Daisy, while Nathan worked to improve the ranch. With his debt to the bank nearly paid and his breeding program beginning to show results, the future looked promising. As winter approached, they prepared the cabin for the cold months ahead. Nathan chopped and stacked firewood, while Lillian preserved vegetables from their garden and arranged the interior for maximum comfort. They worked together seamlessly, as if they had been partners for years rather than months. In late November, the first heavy snow fell, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. That evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, Lillian turned to Nathan with a special light in her eyes. "I have news," she said softly. Nathan set aside the bridle he had been repairing. "What is it?" "I visited Dr. Wilson today," she continued, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "He confirmed what I've suspected for a few weeks now. We're going to have a baby, Nathan, in early summer." Joy unlike anything he had ever known flooded through him. He gathered Lillian gently in his arms, mindful now of the precious life she carried. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our child." She nodded, happy tears glistening in her eyes. "Our family is beginning." That night, as snow continued to fall outside their snug cabin, Nathan lay awake long after Lillian had drifted to sleep. His hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach, his mind filled with visions of the future, a child with Lillian's eyes and his determination, perhaps siblings to follow, the ranch thriving under their joint care, a legacy to pass on to the next generation. He thought of his father, of the handkerchief that had brought him and Lillian together in the cemetery that day, and of all that had transpired since. Life's journey was unpredictable, filled with sorrows and joys, endings and beginnings intertwined. As he finally closed his eyes, Nathan Naylor felt a profound sense of gratitude. The path ahead might not always be easy, but with Lillian by his side, he was ready to face whatever came their way. Together, they would build a life worthy of the love they had found, a love that had begun with a simple act of kindness beside a fresh grave on a spring day in Victor, Colorado. 5 years passed, transforming both the Double N Ranch and the town of Victor. The silver mines had brought prosperity to the region, and the town had grown accordingly. The small schoolhouse where Lillian had once taught alone now boasted 4 classrooms and as many teachers, with Lillian serving as headmistress while maintaining a reduced teaching schedule. The ranch had flourished under Nathan's careful management. The herd had increased to 60 head of quality cattle, and his reputation as a horse breeder had spread throughout Colorado territory and beyond. The cabin had been expanded to include 2 additional bedrooms, a proper study, and an enclosed porch that served as a playroom during the harsh winter months, for the Naylors had indeed begun their family. James Samuel Naylor, named for both grandfathers he would never meet, had arrived in June following their marriage, a healthy, robust boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's thoughtful eyes. 2 years later, Emma Grace had joined the family, bringing with her a sunny disposition and copper curls that matched her mother's. On this particular autumn morning, Nathan stood on the porch watching 4-year-old James attempting to ride his pony under Jack Peterson's watchful eye. The boy had inherited his father's affinity for horses and had been begging for riding lessons since he could form the words. "Not too fast, James," Nathan called as the child urged his mount into a trot. "He's doing fine," Jack reassured him. "Got a natural seat just like his pa." Nathan smiled, pride warming his chest. Just like his grandfather, too. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Lillian appeared on the road leading from town, riding Daisy at a leisurely pace. 2-year-old Emma was secured in front of her, giggling with delight at the motion. "Mama," James called, waving enthusiastically from atop his pony. Lillian waved back, guiding Daisy toward the house. Nathan moved to help her dismount, lifting Emma down first before offering his hand to his wife. "How was your meeting?" he asked, greeting her with a kiss that still held the tenderness of their early courtship. "Productive," she replied, smoothing her riding skirt. "The town council has approved funding for a small library to be attached to the school. Construction will begin in the spring." "That's wonderful news," Nathan said, genuinely pleased. The library had been Lillian's dream for years. "You must be thrilled." "I am," she confirmed, bending to embrace Emma, who had wrapped herself around her mother's legs. "And how have you two been this morning?" "Pa's letting me ride Thunder all by myself," James announced proudly as Jack led him and the pony to the porch steps. "I can see that," Lillian replied with a smile. "You look very grown up, James." The boy beamed at the compliment. "Can I show you what I learned?" "After lunch," Nathan interceded. "Thunder needs a rest, and so do you." James looked ready to protest, but a gentle look from his mother silenced him. "Yes, sir," he conceded. Jack Peterson declined their invitation to join them for the meal, citing his own chores waiting at home. As he mounted his horse to leave, he paused to look over the prosperous ranch. "Samuel would be proud, Nathan," he said quietly. "You've done right by his legacy." The words touched Nathan deeply. "Thank you, Jack, that means a lot." Inside, Lillian prepared a simple lunch while Nathan supervised the children's washing up. They ate at the kitchen table, now larger to accommodate their growing family, amid the cheerful chatter of James recounting his riding lesson, and Emma attempting to mimic her brother's enthusiasm. After the meal, as the children napped in their rooms, Nathan and Lillian sat together on the porch, enjoying a rare moment of quiet togetherness. "I received a letter from Denver today," Nathan said, taking her hand in his. "That breeder I told you about Harrison wants to visit next month to see our stock. He's particularly interested in Starlight's new colt." "That's excellent news," Lillian replied. "Your reputation is spreading." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Pa always said quality speaks for itself. Just takes time for word to travel." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the autumn breeze stir the golden leaves of the aspens along the creek. "I've been thinking," Lillian said after a while, "about hiring someone to help with the house." Nathan glanced at her in surprise. Lillian had always managed their home efficiently, even while continuing her work at the school. "With the new library and my additional responsibilities, I won't be able to reduce my hours as I'd planned," she explained. "And with the children growing and the ranch doing so well. If you think we need the help, then we'll find someone suitable," Nathan agreed readily. He had never wanted Lillian to feel overwhelmed by her dual roles as educator and homemaker. "Perhaps Mrs. Hendricks knows of a trustworthy young woman looking for a position." "I've already spoken with her," Lillian admitted with a smile. "She has a niece arriving from back east next month, 18 years old, well-educated and in need of employment." Nathan chuckled. "You've thought this through, I see." "I try to be thorough," she replied, a teasing light in her eyes. "It's one of the qualities you claimed to admire about me when we were courting." "One of many," he affirmed, lifting her hand to his lips. The sound of Emma stirring in her room brought their quiet moment to an end. As Lillian rose to attend to their daughter, Nathan remained on the porch, contemplating the life they had built together. From the depths of grief beside his father's grave to this abundant happiness, the journey had been unexpected but profoundly rewarding. He thought of the handkerchief Lillian had offered him that day, now preserved in a small box in their bedroom alongside other treasured mementos. Such a simple gesture, yet it had altered the course of both their lives. Inside, he could hear Lillian singing softly to Emma, a lullaby his own mother had once sung to him. James would wake soon too, eager to continue his riding lessons. The ranch demanded constant attention, and tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But for this moment, Nathan Naylor was content simply to be a husband, a father, a rancher carrying forward a legacy while creating his own. The grief that had once threatened to consume him had transformed into a quiet gratitude for all that had followed. As he rose to join his family inside, Nathan paused at the threshold, looking back at the prosperous ranch spread before him. The Double N was thriving, just as his father had always hoped it would. And though Samuel Naylor hadn't lived to see this day, Nathan liked to think that somehow, he knew that the old rancher was watching over them, satisfied with how his son had honored his memory and built upon his foundation. With that comforting thought, Nathan stepped inside to embrace the future he and Lillian continued to forge together one day, one challenge, one joy at a time.